Hello, plant-animal interactions. It's time to follow up on last week's lectures. So at the end of last week's lecture, I was discussing how that there are a couple of different varieties of crops that have been genetically modified to be a BT crop. And there are other crops that are available commercially. And so depending on whether or not you're buying organic foods, you may or may not already be eating some of these. A lot of these productions are geared towards animals, so don't forget, like, alfalfa is on this list because that would be a crop fed to cows. And then also a lot of the corn and soybean is also grown for animals, not necessarily for humans, but we do know that corn and soybean are a part of a lot of processed foods. What I wanted to do now was to show you guys where you could find more information about the crops that are available. And so if you're ever interested in understanding what you might be eating, there are ways to find out more. It's hard to really know what variety you may be eating at any given time unless you contact the producer of what you're purchasing. If you want to avoid genetically modified crops altogether, buying something with the organic label does achieve that. But if you're not buying organic, it can be hard to know what varieties exactly you are eating. However, if it's not organic, like I've shown before, a vast majority of our soybean and corn and cotton, even though we're not eating cotton, are genetically modified. And so if you're not buying organic, then it's safe to assume that as a consumer, if you're buying anything with soybean or corn, that it's probably a genetically modified version for either BT or herbicide tolerance or both. But anyways, in order to find out more about the plants, there's two governmental agencies involved. One is the USDA. Well, actually it's three depending. One is the USDA, the other is the EPA, and then finally the FDA. The USDA, in particular, this department called APHIS, is responsible for regulating new plant varieties, including those generated by biotechnology. And so it's their job to assess the risk of having that plant in the environment. The EPA would be involved if the plants are genetically modified to be insecticidal, or maybe they're herbicide tolerant, stuff like that. And then the FDA would get involved if the crop is for animal or human consumption. And so out of all of those, probably the only one that is only looked at by the USDA well, I guess to be USDA and EPA would be cotton. Although, as I'll show you in a minute, it is being designed and worked on to make a cotton variety that is low gossipol. And gossipol is the toxin in cotton seeds in particular. And because of that toxin, those seeds are poisonous. And so you don't want to eat cotton seeds. Now, to be clear, cotton lint is not toxic, but there's this chemical called gossipol in the seeds. And so one of the ideas here is that if you can make the seeds non-toxic, you potentially have another food source for animals or a source for oils, like you make corn oil or soybean oil or whatever other kind of oil. So anyways, let me show you the website for APHIS. So the website can be a little bit intimidating to navigate, but if you ever want to know something about a plant that may have been genetically modified and you want to know what's its status in regards to being non-regulated, being non-regulated means that the producer of the crop or the maker of the crop can sell it to farmers to be grown. And so therefore the crop becomes commercialized And that's what it means to be non-regulated. And so you'll notice on this list that there are some that are pending and there are some that are deregulated, and those are commercially available. And you can also look for ones that are withdrawn. So these are applications that were submitted and then for some reason the company didn't want them considered anymore. But anyways, if we look at what's most recently been submitted, you can see there's a couple of different things coming on the market soon. So I'm not actually sure what this phytase enzyme is meant to achieve, but we can look at the documents and find out. But you'll see that there's a cotton here that's insect resistant. This will be a BT cotton. Its producer is a company called Monsanto. Monsanto was recently purchased by Bayer. So this one must have been submitted before that purchase happened. There are lots of other producers of genetically modified crops. Here's one for corn, enhanced grain yield potential, and this resistance to glufosinate ammonium. I think that's a herbicide. And then you have things like canola, where you have altered oil profile. So think canola oil and how can you make canola oil better. Here's a cotton for low gospel, okay? So Texas A&M University is a producer attempting to make low gospel cotton for the reasons that I described. So some of these traits are easily understood from the table. Some of them are not, and so it takes a little bit more investigation. There's a freeze-tolerant eucalyptus on here. Blight-resistant potato is blight is a disease. And yeah, so this is where you can kind of see where things are at. You'll notice that year by year, there's not too many that get deregulated. Let me do this by date, see what happens. So for example, in 2018, there was only 4 crops deregulated. 2017, only 2. Honestly, for me, as a scientist, sometimes I find that low number surprising. But then when I think about the research and development involved with making these crops, it's not surprising. In order for a crop to be designed via biotech, like transgenic techniques, and then reach commercialization, it takes about 10 years and millions of dollars, okay? And so what you're seeing here are the company's best bets. And if you watch the video about breeding, selective breeding, you'll notice that they have to screen through, hundreds and hundreds of progenies from the generations that they make. That's a similar process with biotech. You don't just make the plant and you just have a really good one immediately. It takes screening and screening and screening and trying and trying and trying until you finally get one with the appropriate genotype. As you guys may have experienced in the lab, not all transgene experiments are successful, and so they have to be sorted out for which ones were successful and which ones were not. Okay, so something that I wanted to share with you was a little bit more about what information you can find out and how this process works. More recently, there's been a crop, apple, that has been genetically modified. And you see I sorted by